Hey guys, today I'm back in Polybridge and I'm gonna try making a plane, or more specifically a glider. Now Polybridge doesn't have any air resistance, so normal wings are completely out of the question, but I have another idea of how to generate lift, so let's get right into it. So I'm starting out here in the sandbox, and you can see the first thing I'm doing is just putting in some static anchors so that I can start messing around with some engines. And you may wonder why I want to work on an engine, but things at really high speeds tend to be very glitchy in this game, and I figured I could probably abuse that somehow to end up making something cool. But you can see it instantly breaks. And it's because I kind of did unbreakable mode on, so that's what I'm doing here. And now loading in, nothing seems to happen. But it just takes a second, because you can see it starts to spin up, and for whatever reason, it just keeps accelerating until a certain point, and gets to this maximum speed. And that's pretty good, but I thought I could improve on this, and I've actually seen something where if you take the same idea, but instead use hydraulics to pull on the springs, you can get even more tension on them, and that should give you a lot more thrust. So here I'm giving that a shot, and you can see how all these hydraulics pull on the springs, and it seemed pretty good. It seemed to be accelerating faster, but it's hard to tell because it may have just been slightly imbalanced. But you can see here, it's definitely just better after letting it go for a while. So this is definitely a design I want to go with in the future. At 20% speed, you can see it's definitely way better. So this is the loosely design I want to roll with, but I figured I can improve on this basic design quite a bit. So starting out, what I wanted to do is have two opposing hydraulics pull on the spring, because I figured I'd make it a little bit more tension that way. So giving it a shot here, you can see it pulls on it, seems fine. And it seems to accelerate a little bit faster, and it might be doing a little bit better. But it's not like leaps and bounds better. So to do that, I wanted to double up the engines I have here, and I just rotated them, put them on, braced them a little bit, and give it a shot. So as the springs get pulled, you can see they accelerated about the same rate, but they seem to go for a little bit longer, and it might end up being a bit faster. But I figured, why am I stopping here? I'm not really stretching the springs as much as I possibly can. So to do that, I wanted to have the hydraulics be way longer to pull the springs an incredibly far distance. And here I'm giving that a shot, and it's horribly imbalanced. But even with this, you can see it pretty easily starts rotating on its own, and it gets up to a pretty good speed. Now, it was imbalanced, and it wasn't really that great, so what I wanted to do is double this up and see if I could double the speed out of this. And that's not quite what happened. It's actually not that far off from being twice as fast, but it's definitely not quite there. But I figured I may as well just go crazy with this, and I added 8 of these in total. So this should be really fast, and I figured really this should be the optimal design. But already you can see it's really big, and it still accelerates kind of slowly, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it's definitely gonna make things messy if I try to run with this design. So I put this engine off to the side, and I wanted to try again with a little bit of a different design. So here you can see I'm using much smaller springs once again, but I'm using a bunch of hydraulics all grouped together. And the idea is instead of having two opposing hydraulics pull, I can have one set push the other hydraulic out and get effectively double the distance out of each of those hydraulics without having the design be massive. Now this initially didn't quite work. You can see it folded in on itself, but just stretching out the steel a little bit did allow it to work. Everything's stretching a little bit oddly, but it does seem to be holding, and it accelerates a lot faster, and you can see here it seems to be going a little bit faster as well, and this honestly seems to be really good. So with that looking solid, I wanted to improve on it even more and use diamond hydraulics to pull in the springs as much as I can. And this accelerated it really fast, and it got it up way faster. So honestly, this design seemed like it was going to be the best way to go. And initially, I was messing around with some boat designs. So I started up by making a 4-bar linkage, and once I got that all looking good, I ended up attaching it to some wheels, and I just wanted to see how well it could go across the water. Since in theory, going across the water should be easier than flying in the air. So I gave this a shot here, and you can see already we have some weird effects going on. Notice how the front of this is almost floating in the air. That seemed quite weird. So what I wanted to do was just put this in the air, see how it does if I just drop it at high speed, and I figured it had a shot at doing something interesting. So I made it a split joint so that once it got up to speed, it would drop, and here, let it go, and just wanted to see what would happen. So once I got up to speed, waited a little bit, and eventually it dropped. And look at how it just slowly falls down. I think what's happening here is as it rotates, the game just gets really confused about where the center of mass is, and it just sort of doesn't put enough force on it to pull it down, and thus it just slowly falls. Now, I don't think I could abuse this to make it end up flying up, because I think it's just a function of gravity not being calculated for enough. I don't think this has anything to do with the fact that it's producing any upward thrust. I think gravity is just getting confused, so I don't think it's possible to make it go up any further, but I think I can make it glide really slowly down and make something cool out of that. And you can see here, it's going so fast, it's super glitchy. If it hits the islands, it just gets thrown all over the place. So this design, definitely going to be temperamental. but I think I can get it to work. So the next thing I wanted to do is double these up and just see what effect it had. So what I'm doing here is putting in a 4-bar linkage to link them, but I didn't quite set it up correctly, and also I realized the 4-bar linkage is actually kind of a bad idea here. Now the 4-bar linkage links the rotation of these two together so that they'll be permanently linked. And here I'm fixing it up actually, I just need to put in some steel to hold them a fixed distance apart. Now the reason this wasn't a great idea is because actually basically the engines are now forced to rotate together, which means if one of them is weaker than the other engine's gonna have to necessarily be a little bit weaker in order to work. And I think as a function of speed, just the faster I go in general, the better. So having to average out the speed is actually a bad thing here, and I'd rather just have a bunch of engines all rotating separately. And you can see in that test, it didn't seem to be that bad at all, but I figured I could just go for 4 and see what happens as well. So that's what I'm doing here, and you can see it swings back and forth, and eventually it ends up like kind of stuck in place, this weird triple pendulum thing, and eventually once it lets go as well, you can see it's going so slowly down. I'm surprised I was able to get it this slow, and this isn't even the end of it. And the next thing I thought to do was get rid of the roads at the end, because I figured maybe they didn't matter as much, and they might have been slowing things down slightly. So that's what I'm doing here. So starting out, you can see it falls down, and everything almost gets perfectly pinned in place. And once it falls, it's just so slow. This seems like it's so close to just being able to almost perfectly stay in place, and it's just a little bit of weight from the engine itself pulling it down. So since it seemed like speed was what mattered here and not any sort of weight distribution, I wanted to put that to the test and do a bit of an extreme. So what I have here is a massive muscle I'm making, and this is going to be just one rigid beam that I can rotate around with the engine. Now, trying it out here, it didn't really work out that well because I didn't hook it up correctly, and you can see it sort of just went crazy. But after connecting it up a little bit better with some extra cables and also connecting it up to all the other legs, I gave it a try here, and you can see as it starts to go, it's not great. So it starts off very slow, and the max speed actually caps very quickly. In fact, it's not even going fast enough where it can really sustain any motion. So adding a bunch of weight on the very ends does not seem to be like a good idea, and in fact, getting as much speed as possible still seems to be like the best way to go. So I undid all of those changes I did, and what I wanted to do is add on more springs to the engine to see if I can get even more force. Now, adding on 4 more springs like this seemed to actually make it accelerate a lot faster, and it's falling even slower once again. So I added on a whole bunch more springs, because I figured maybe if I just add more and more, it'd just keep getting better. But it did seem to cap at some point. So after I added all of these springs, you can see it's pretty similar to before. It might be a little bit slower, but it's not that much slower. So I think I've reached the maximum amount of what I can do with springs, and I want to start messing around with cables. Now, the reason cables are good here is because they stretch much less than springs, which means that in theory, they should be better since I had to pull on them less to get a lot more force. But they're just so not stretchy that they end up breaking stuff a lot more than anything else. You can see here I get a little bit of stretching, but it just is not really useful because it all disintegrates. And I tried very hard to get this to work, even with some steel, but I just couldn't quite get it there. So I ended up scrapping that idea, and I had another idea instead of how to get infinite motion. Now, the only reason I was trying this is because I've seen it work before, and I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to be missing something really good here. So the idea is I have this big ring, and you can see it has a bunch of roads around it, and I'm putting a monster truck in the middle. Now, the monster truck, I am absolutely maxing out its stats. So you can see here, I'm making it go super fast and making it decently heavy, and once it starts going here, it's kind of crazy, but eventually it does end up going around, and you can see this crazy movement I get. Now, I'm hoping I can use this movement to make this jump up and down, and I'm hoping I can use this to give me a ton of speed and keep myself in the air. So I'm moving the wheel onto the ground, moving the monster truck as well, and giving it a shot here. It's not quite working. And it's because the monster truck doesn't really weigh enough to make any noticeable difference here. So I increased its mass from 1/10 of a polygram to 10 polygrammes, and once I did this, it was very chaotic. And in fact, that was sort of its biggest problem. It was just so chaotic, it didn't really matter what I did. It was just going to be something weird. So I tried pinning it down a little bit with some extra roads, but even this just did not seem to improve things all that much. And as this spun around and around, it ended up clipping right through the edge of the wheel a lot. And there's nothing you could do at this point. Once it's clipped through the wheel, it's not really going to be generating extra speed. So really the best I could do was like this, where you can see it's staying in the air a bit, but it's not really even beating my hydraulic engine. It has the downside of being incredibly chaotic. So I wanted to not deal with that design, and it did seem like this hydraulic engine with the springs was going to be my best bet for keeping myself in the air. So I linked 2 of them together like this, and you can see here, it looks pretty good. It's slowly falling down. So I wanted to add a car to this and give it a bit of a payload, and this car is going to be what's going to fly from one side to the other and then eventually back as well. So I just moved the car up where it needed to go, and after that, I just built up a small cradle using some roads. Now I didn't really think too much of it. I just kind of cased it in, but I realized the car is kind of bouncing out because the supports between the two rotating wheels are kind of going crazy. So we just raised up the walls a little bit and also put on a cap like this. Eventually I'm going to make it a hydraulic cap so the car can drive in, but for now I'm just using steel to hold it in place. After that, gave it a quick test and it seems to be working. It's falling down and the car is actually holding in there. And this isn't too bad. It is going to flip over though, and that's just because the car ends up wanting to flip to the bottom since it's the heaviest part. I can fix that eventually, but for now what I want to do is figure out a way to get this to start moving forward. Now this seems like it should be easy, but in reality, I mean, the fact that it's even just falling down slowly is already a glitch, so to get it to start moving forward as well, I'm going to need another glitch to do this. Now originally I was thinking I could probably use the truck and the roads to get this done, because they end up moving back and forth chaotically, so if I had them chaotically move more forward than anything else, in theory that should work. So I put the big wheel on top of this, and you can see when I put the truck in there, it does seem to be working. It has a bit of trouble, but it does end up starting to rotate, and it seems like maybe it'll get it done. So I let it go here, and once the truck started going, it immediately became obvious this was a problem. So first of all, it's very top heavy except for the truck on top. I can fix that in the future, but what I can't fix is the fact that it's literally doing nothing. So it seems like this is producing no thrust at all, and I wanted to go for a different design instead. So the next thing I was thinking was to have a bunch of trucks or just some sort of car race out of the back of this and generate me a bit of thrust as it does that. Now you can see here I'm just putting in a pickup truck, and I'm encasing in the back as well because I was thinking of having the truck run back and forth just so I could see if the whole thing was moving back and forth a little bit easier, but this really didn't seem to work. The problem is just that the center of mass is so messed up by the truck that it just keeps flipping over, and even if I put it on the bottom, it would still end up just tilting to one side or the other, and I don't really think I get the result I want. So instead what I'm doing is putting in a bunch of roads, and you can see I have a hydraulic to pull them from side to side. And I was hoping I'd be able to use this to influence the way it tilts and maybe the way it moves. And this seemed to have literally no effect at all. But I did realize the wheels really don't want to move in one direction or the other. So if I had one of these and if I tried pulling on it, I figured maybe I'd be able to move myself forward. And this actually seemed to work out pretty well. So after I got the hydraulic put in place and I started it up here, once it let go, it didn't seem to completely fail. You can see it tilts back and forth much easier than before, and it actually weighs a lot less as well. The problem though is that I have to bring it back somehow, so even though it ends up moving forward a little bit, it just oscillates back and forth and I still don't really get anywhere. So this final design I have here, which was the one that I ended up working out, was actually what I had originally, which is one of these small engines that's just the simple spring engine. And I was thinking of putting 4 of these engines on the ends of these 2 big engines I have, and the motivation was that as these rotate, I figured they might get really messed up by the way the big engines are rotating as well and produce the thrust going forward instead of just straight up. So I gave it a shot here, but actually there's an interesting effect. They get all thrown to the outside and they sort of deform badly, but they still seem to be having an effect because as I let it go, it starts moving forward. Now it starts tilting as well. Again, I could fix that in a second just by flipping the carriage to the bottom, but it actually seems to be working. So I just moved the car so it'd be on the bottom like this. And once I did that, just made sure to brace it all in place. And I also added in some platforms for the car to drive in on. Now, I don't really know why I wanted the car to drive into this. I think I thought it'd look cool, and I guess it kind of does, but it adds a little bit of complexity. But you can see as the car gets in there, engine starts up, and it lets go, and it starts flying to the other side. So with that done, what I wanted to do is add in the first stop. Now, I want 2 stops here. I want it to stop on this island I'm making right now, but I also wanted to turn around and then go to a second island that's much closer to the water level. Now, I thought it'd look pretty cool if I get this to turn around, so I figured might as well give it a shot. And you can see here I gave it a bit of a landing area. And as it gets in place, it's a little rough, but goes where it needs to go. And with that island put in place, the next thing I need to do is figure out some way to reverse the direction that this is moving. Now I figured maybe if I use some extra hydraulics to pull in the engines and the sides of the wheels, it might have some effect, but you can see this just fell straight down. There was no real effect here. So next thing I thought was if I stopped the engine and then have the wheels rotate in the opposite direction, they might rotate the way I want them to. So here I just made myself some legs and they're pretty simple. And the whole idea of these that I can land on these and then I'll use hydraulics to pull them in and have the wheels sit on the ground, and that'll end up stopping them. So with the legs put in place, you can see here, lands where it needs to. And all I have left to do is put in the hydraulics to pull in the legs. So that's what I'm putting in now. Once I have this in place, you can see it flies over to the other island. And once it lands there, it initiates the checkpoint and it starts pulling in the legs. Now when it does this, you can see the wheels slowly come to a halt, and actually here, they pretty much stop. Now the problem is I have no real way of dictating which way they start back up, and one of them started up the right way and one of them started up the wrong way. And really it just took a lot of adjusting to get this to work. It was pretty much luck which direction they were going to start in. I was looking for a better way to do this, but I literally don't think there is one. I think this design is just so chaotic that it really does require some luck to get working, but eventually here I did get it. You can see the legs extend back up, and both the wheels go in the right direction, and miraculously, I actually was right on that, and you can see it starts moving in the other direction now. So once it does that, it starts falling off the island and slowly coasting back to the main island. Once it does that, I actually positioned the checkpoint perfectly once again, and it happened to land in the right spot. So with that done, there's actually the final design, and you can see it here. So, car gets loaded up, falls into the checkpoint, engines start up like this, and the wheels take a little bit to start up with all the extra weight on the end of them, but they seem to still get going pretty easily. After that, detaches from its joints, and slowly starts drifting towards the first island. Eventually here you can see, get a good landing. Car reaches checkpoint flag, which initiates the legs to pull in, and once it does that, you can see the wheels end up stopping, and after a little bit of time, you can see here, legs end up pushing back out, and the wheels start rotating in the other direction. Once you do that, it slowly makes its way over to the edge and kind of falls off, but fortunately it ends up correcting itself, and I slowly make my way back to the first island as well. And with that, it's level completion, and that's the plane. So guys, thanks for watching. It's definitely a fun video to make. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was going to do with this engine, but I'm glad I found a really good use for it, because it's a ton of fun to make, and I never would have thought this would have been possible in Polybridge. So, if you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Feel free to leave a question or comment down below, and otherwise, until next time.